Lilith Calloway thought her diamond-encrusted platinum status was a shield that allowed her to say anything, to anyone, without consequence. She was wrong. On a fully booked flight out of JFK, Lilith decided that the presence of a successful black family in first class was a personal insult she couldn't tolerate. She screamed, she demanded, and she insulted until she demanded to see the pilot. That was her final mistake. When Captain Andre Washington stepped out of the cockpit, he didn't just defend the passengers. He made a decision that would ground the plane, go viral globally, and utterly dismantle Lilith's life in a way she never saw coming. Watch how one woman's racism met the hardest wall of karma imaginable. Flight 882, destined for London Heathrow, sat heavy on the tarmac at JFK International Airport. Inside the cabin, the air was conditioned to a crisp chill, smelling faintly of leather and expensive cologne. For Lilith Calloway, this was her natural habitat. Dressed in a cream-colored cashmere blazer that cost more than most people's cars, she adjusted her oversized sunglasses and marched down the jet bridge, her Louis Vuitton carry-on rolling silently behind her. Lilith was the vice president of communications for Holt & Varner, a global PR firm. Her entire life was built on image, control, and the unshakable belief that she was simply better than the general population. She didn't just expect luxury. She felt entitled to a curated reality where nothing unpleasant or unsightly ever intruded. She handed her boarding pass to the flight attendant at the door, a young woman named Sarah with a patient smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. "Welcome back, Ms. Calloway," Sarah said, scanning the pass. "Seat 1A. Can I get you a pre-departure champagne?" "Make it a vintage if you have anything drinkable opened," Lilith snapped, not making eye contact. She pushed past, entering the first-class cabin. This was her sanctuary. 12 lie-flat suites, privacy partitions, and silence. She expected to see the usual clientele, bored tech CIOs, perhaps a celebrity trying to stay hidden, or old money retirees heading to their summer estates. Instead, Lilith stopped dead in the aisle. Occupying seats 1C, 1D, 2C, and 2D, effectively dominating the center of the cabin, was a family. A black family. A father, a mother, and 2 teenage children. They were laughing softly, arranging their belongings. The father, a man with broad shoulders and glasses, was wearing a crisp navy suit that looked bespoke. The mother was elegant in a silk wrap dress, helping her daughter adjust her headphones. Lilith's lip curled. In her twisted worldview, first class was a club, and someone had let the wrong people in. It wasn't just that they were there. It was their joy, their comfort, their absolute belonging in a space she considered hers that triggered a spark of irrational malice in her chest. She finally moved to seat 1A, slamming her bag into the overhead bin with unnecessary force. The noise caused the father in 1C to look up. He offered a polite, brief nod before turning back to his wife. The lack of deference infuriated her. Lilith sat down, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrests. She pulled out her phone, aggressively typing a text message to her assistant, though the plane was still boarding. "Unbelievable. The cabin is overrun. It looks like a charity flight. I'm going to have a migraine before we even take off." She hit send, then looked up as Sarah arrived with the champagne. Lilith didn't take the glass. "Excuse me," Lilith said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that was meant to be heard. "Is there a problem with the booking system today?" Sarah blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, Miss Calloway. The flight is fully booked, but we are on schedule." "I don't mean the schedule," Lilith hissed, tilting her head toward the center aisle. "I mean the demographic. I specifically choose this airline for its exclusivity. I feel incredibly crowded. It feels unsafe." Sarah's expression tightened. She glanced at the family, who were quietly reading and chatting. "Ma'am, every passenger in this cabin has paid for their ticket. Everyone has gone through security. There is no safety issue." "You aren't listening to me," Lilith said, her voice rising just enough to cut through the ambient noise of boarding passengers. "I paid $6,000 for peace and quiet, not to sit next to a community center gathering. I want to be moved." "Moved where, Mum?" Sarah asked, her patience thinning. "This is first class. There are no other seats." "Then move them." Lilith pointed a manicured finger directly at the father in seat 1C. "Move them back to economy, where there's more room for their group. I'm sure they'd be more comfortable with their own kind." The silence that followed was instant and suffocating. The father in 1C slowly took off his glasses. The mother froze. Lilith Calloway sat back, sipping her champagne, believing she had just restored order. She had no idea she had just lit the fuse on a bomb that would blow her entire life apart. Dr. Kalen Bishop, the man in seat 1C, was tired. As one of the top neurosurgeons at Johns Hopkins, he had spent the last 72 hours performing back-to-back complex surgeries. This trip to London was a rare vacation for him and his wife, Elena, a corporate attorney, and their twins. He had heard the woman in 1A. He had felt the dagger of her stare since she boarded. He placed a hand on Eleanor's arm, signaling her to stay calm. He had dealt with people like Lilith Calloway his entire life, people who thought his success was a glitch in the matrix, something to be corrected. "Is there a problem?" Kalen asked, his voice deep and calm, though it carried a steel edge. Lilith swiveled in her seat, looking at him with mock surprise. "I wasn't speaking to you. I was speaking to the staff. But since you asked, yes. You're loud. You're taking up too much space. And frankly, your presence is devaluing my experience." "We haven't said a word since you sat down," Elena said, her voice sharp. "And we paid for these seats just like you did." "Oh, I'm sure," Lilith laughed, a cruel, tinkling sound. "Affirmative action points? Lottery winners? Or maybe you're just spending settlement money. It doesn't matter. You don't fit the aesthetic." Sarah, the flight attendant, stepped in between them, her face flushed. "Miss Calloway, that is enough. You are disturbing the other passengers. If you continue to use offensive language, I will have to report this." Lilith's eyes widened. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. She was not a tall woman, but her fury gave her a toxic kind of height. "Report me," Lilith screeched. "Do you know who I am? I am a Diamond Medallion member. I personally know the VP of Operations for this airline. I am telling you that I feel threatened by this gang of people surrounding me, and you are taking their side." Passengers in the rows behind, business class and economy, were starting to crane their necks. Phones were coming out. The red recording lights were blinking. Lilith was too enraged to notice. "Ma'am, sit down," Sarah ordered, her voice firm. "I will not sit down until you get the pilot," Lilith shouted, gesturing wildly. "I want the captain. I want him to see what is happening in his cabin. I want him to see that the standards of this airline have dropped into the gutter. Get the pilot out here and tell him a passenger is being held hostage by thugs." Kalen stood up then. He didn't move toward her. He just stood to his full height of 6'3", blocking her view of his children. "Call me a thug one more time," he said quietly. "Thug," Lilith screamed, spitting the word out. "Thug! Criminal! Scammer! Get off this plane!" The tension in the cabin was brittle, ready to snap. Sarah backed away, pressing the intercom button to the cockpit. "Captain, we have a code 3 in first class. Passenger is aggressive, using racial slurs and refusing to sit. She is demanding to see you." "I don't just demand it," Lilith yelled. grabbing her purse as if she needed a weapon. "I am the only paying customer here who matters. Get the pilot. He'll understand. He's a professional. He won't want to fly with trash in his cabin." The cockpit door hissed. The lock clicked. Lilith smirked, smoothing her blazer. Finally, someone with authority. She expected a white man with grey hair, someone who looked like her father, someone who would share her sensibilities. She prepared her victim face, ready to cry crocodile tears about how scared she was. The door swung open. Captain Andre Washington stepped out. A black man with greying temples, 4 gold stripes on his shoulder, and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. He looked at Sarah. He looked at the Bishop family, giving Kaelin a microscopic nod of recognition. And then he looked at Lilith Calloway. Lilith's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The silence that fell over the plane was heavier than gravity. "You wanted to see the captain?" Andre said, his voice low, resonating through the silent cabin. "I'm Captain Washington. Explain to me exactly why you are screaming at my passengers." Lilith Calloway blinked, her brain struggling to process the visual information in front of her. The script she had written in her head, the one where a sympathetic, older white gentleman would pat her on the shoulder and agree that standards were slipping, had just been incinerated. Standing before her was Captain Andre Washington, a man radiating an authority so absolute it made the air in the cabin feel thinner. For a split second, self-preservation kicked in. A rational person would have apologized. A rational person would have realized they were dangerously out of their depth. But Lilith was not rational. She was entitled, and her entitlement had just been cornered. "I asked for the captain," Lilith said, her voice trembling not with fear, but with indignity. She gestured vaguely at Andre's uniform. "Not the co-pilot. Not the affirmative action hire. I want the person actually in charge of this aircraft." The gasp from the surrounding rows was audible. Sarah, the flight attendant, covered her mouth with her hand. Elena Bishop, in seat 1D, reached for her phone, her thumb hovering over the record button. Captain Washington didn't flinch. His expression remained stone-cold, his eyes locked onto Lilith's flushed face. He took a slow, deliberate step into the cabin, crossing the threshold from the cockpit. "I am the captain," Andre said, his voice calm but carrying a dangerous weight. "I have flown for this airline for 25 years. I served in the Air Force for 10, and I am the sole authority on this vessel. Now, I asked you a question. Why are you screaming at my passengers?" Lilith scoffed, crossing her arms. "I am not screaming. I am complaining. These people," she pointed a sharp nail at the Bishop family, "are clearly not suited for this cabin. They are loud, they are aggressive, and I feel unsafe. I demanded they be moved. Since the stewardess wouldn't do her job, I expected you to do yours." Andre looked at Dr. Kaelin Bishop. "Sir, have you or your family threatened this woman?" "We haven't spoken to her, Captain," Kaelin replied, his voice level, "until she began shouting racial slurs at my children." Andre turned back to Lilith. "Is that true? Did you use racial slurs?" "I used descriptive language," Lilith snapped. "And look at them. They don't belong here. I paid $6,000 for this seat. I pay your salary. I demand you get them off my flight, so I can travel in peace." Captain Washington stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he slowly shook his head. He reached up and unclipped the radio from his shoulder. "You feel unsafe, Miss Calloway?" Andre asked. "Yes. Finally you're listening," she huffed, adjusting her blazer. "Good," Andre said, "because I agree. There is a safety issue on this plane." Lilith smiled triumphantly. She turned to the bishops, a smug look on her face. "See? I told you. Pack your bags." "Not them," Andre's voice cut through her victory like a guillotine. Lilith whipped her head back around. "Excuse me?" "You," Andre said. "You are the safety threat. Aviation law dictates that no passenger who is belligerent, erratic, or abusive to crew and fellow passengers can remain on board. You have insulted my crew, you have harassed a family, and you have insulted me. A flight requires trust and order. You have destroyed both." Lilith laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound. "You can't be serious. You can't kick me off. I'm a Diamond member. I know people. If you touch me, I'll have your wings stripped before we land." Andre looked at her with pity. "Ma'am, you don't seem to understand. I'm not just kicking you off." He turned to the rest of the cabin, addressing the stunned passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Washington. I apologize for the delay. However, I refuse to pilot an aircraft with a passenger who abuses my crew and customers based on the color of their skin. Until this security threat is removed, this plane is not going anywhere. I am stepping off the aircraft until Port Authority arrives." With that, Captain Washington turned on his heel. He didn't go back into the cockpit. He walked past Lilith, past the stunned flight attendants, and walked right out the cabin door, up the jet bridge. He walked out. The pilot had literally left the plane. Lilith stood alone in the aisle, the sudden silence deafening. She looked around, expecting support. Instead, she saw 20 other first-class passengers looking at her with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You stupid woman," a man in row 3 growled. "You just grounded the plane." The atmosphere inside the plane shifted from tense to hostile in seconds. Lilith Calloway stood frozen near seat 1A, her mind unable to comprehend the reality of the situation. The pilot had walked out? Because of her? It was impossible. In her world, service workers, even pilots, bowed to the will of the customer, especially a customer with her spending power. "He's bluffing," Lilith muttered, mostly to herself. She sat down, pulling her phone out with shaking hands. "He's just making a scene. He'll be back in 5 minutes." "He won't," Sarah, the flight attendant, said, her voice trembling but firm. "Captain Washington does not bluff. He has initiated a level 3 security protocol. The police are on their way." "Let them come!" Lilith shrieked, her thumb flying across her phone screen as she tried to find the number for the airline's corporate headquarters. "I'll have him fired. I'll sue this entire airline into bankruptcy." From seat 1D, Elena Bishop stood up. She was no longer just a mother protecting her children. She was a partner at Wolf & Baxter, one of New York's most vicious litigation firms. She held her phone up, the camera lens steady and unblinking. "You might want to save your battery for your lawyer," Elena said coolly. "I've recorded the last 10 minutes, every slur, every threat, and the captain's statement." "Put that away!" Lilith lunged toward Elena, her hand swiping through the air. "Don't touch her!" Dr. Kalen Bishop was on his feet instantly, placing his large frame between Lilith and his wife. "Assault," Elena stated calmly, still recording. "Attempted assault on a fellow passenger. Keep going, honey. You're just digging the hole deeper." Before Lilith could scream again, the heavy thud of boots echoed down the jet bridge. 2 officers from the Port Authority Police Department boarded the plane. They were large men, looking less than pleased about having to deal with a disturbance on a fully loaded transatlantic flight. The lead officer, whose badge read Miller, scanned the cabin. "Who is the disruptive passenger?" Officer Miller asked. Every single person in first class, including the flight attendants, pointed at Lilith. Lilith smoothed her hair, putting on her best misunderstood victim face. She stepped toward the officers. "Officers, thank God you're here. This pilot has abandoned the plane, and these people are harassing me. I want to file a formal "Ma'am, stop!" Officer Miller interrupted, his hand resting on his belt. "Captain Washington has already briefed us outside. We have multiple witness statements regarding hate speech, disorderly conduct, and interference with a flight crew. Grab your bag, you're coming with us." "I most certainly am not," Lilith gasped. "Do you know who I am? I am the Vice President of—" "I don't care if you're the Queen of England," Miller said, his patience evaporating. "This is federal jurisdiction. You are delaying a flight. You have two choices: walk off or be dragged off in handcuffs." Lilith looked around the cabin, searching for an ally. "Is no one going to help me? This is tyranny." "Get off the plane," a woman from the back of the cabin shouted. "Bye, Karen," someone else yelled from economy, where the news had filtered back. Lilith's face turned a mottled purple. She snatched her Louis Vuitton bag from the overhead bin, swinging it wildly and nearly hitting Sarah. "Fine, I don't want to be on this ghetto bird anyway. I will be taking a private charter." "Move," Miller ordered, gesturing to the door. Lilith began her walk of shame. As she passed the Bishop family, she stopped. She looked at Dr. Kalen Bishop, her eyes full of venom. "You think you won?" she hissed. "You're nothing. I'll destroy you." Kalen just adjusted his glasses, looking at her with the clinical detachment of a surgeon looking at a tumor. "I think you have bigger problems than me, Ms. Calloway." Officer Miller grabbed Lilith's arm to hustle her forward. Lilith instinctively yanked her arm back and shoved the officer's chest. "Don't touch me!" The mood instantly shifted from administrative to tactical. "That's assault on an officer," Miller barked. In one fluid motion, he spun Lilith around. "Ow! You're hurting me!" Lilith screamed as the handcuffs clicked tight around her wrists. "You are under arrest," Miller recited, pushing her forward. Lilith Calloway, Vice President of Communications, was frog-marched off, Flight 882. As she was dragged up the aisle, screaming about lawsuits and her rights, a spontaneous round of applause erupted in the cabin. It started in first class and rolled back like a wave through economy. Elena Bishop stopped recording. She looked at the footage, checked the clarity of the audio, and then looked at her husband. "She said she works for Holt and Varner," Elena mused. "That's the PR firm representing that new youth fashion brand, right? The one trying to launch a diversity campaign?" Kalen smirked. "I believe it is." Elena tapped her screen. "Twitter needs to see this." The holding cell at JFK's Port Authority station was a stark contrast to the first-class lounge Lilith was used to. It smelled of stale coffee and floor cleaner. Lilith sat on a metal bench, still handcuffed, her expensive blazer wrinkled, and one of her heels broken from the struggle. She had been processed, fingerprinted, and charged with disorderly conduct, interfering with a flight crew, and assault on a police officer. But in Lilith's mind, this was all a temporary misunderstanding. Once she got her phone back, once she called Arthur Pendleton, the CEO of Holt and Varner, he would pull some strings. He knew senators. He knew judges. This would all go away, and she would sue the airline for millions. After 3 hours, a different officer unlocked the cell. "Your lawyer is here. You've made bail." Lilith stood up, chin high. About time. She walked out to the front desk, where a junior associate from her company's legal retainer was waiting. He looked pale. He handed her her personal belongings, including her phone. "Where is Arthur?" Lilith demanded as she turned her phones on. "Why did they send you?" "Arthur couldn't come," the associate said, avoiding eye contact. "Lilith, we need to get you out the back exit. The press is out front." "The press?" Lilith brightened. "Good. I want to give a statement. I want to tell my side of the story about that aggressive pilot." "No," the associate said, looking horrified. "Lilith, you don't understand. Have you looked at your phone?" Lilith frowned and looked down at her screen. It was blowing up. Thousands of notifications, missed calls from numbers she didn't know, texts from friends asking if she was okay or telling her she was insane. She opened X, formerly Twitter. Trending number 1 globally. No Airport Karen. Trending number 2 globally. No Captain Washington. Trending number 3 globally. Lilith Calloway racist, her heart hammered against her ribs. Her fingers shook as she clicked the top link. It was Elena Bishop's video. The angle was perfect. It showed everything. It showed the beautiful black family sitting quietly. It showed Lilith screaming, "Thug!" It showed her demanding the pilot. And most damning of all, it showed the heroic entrance of Captain Washington and his calm, devastating dismantling of her entitlement. The video had 45 million views. It had been posted 3 hours ago. "Oh my God," Lilith whispered. She scrolled down. The internet detectives had done their work with terrifying speed. A Justice Seeker 999 posted, "Identified. Her name is Lilith Calloway. She's the VP of Comms at Holt-Varner PR. Imagine a PR VA being this racist. Dajdar's boycott Holt-Varner." Our Fly High posted, "Captain Andre Washington is a hero. He grounded the plane to protect his passengers. Give this man a raise. BTW, Lilith Calloway's LinkedIn is already locked. Coward." Lilith felt bile rise in her throat. She refreshed her email. There was one new message from Arthur Pendleton, sent 10 minutes ago. Subject: Termination of employment, Lilith. Effective immediately, your employment with Holt and Varner is terminated for gross misconduct and violation of our code of ethics. Do not come to the office. Your personal effects will be mailed to you. Furthermore, our biggest client, Zephyr Apparel, has just dropped us because of your association with the firm. You have single-handedly cost this company 40% of its revenue in one afternoon. Our legal team will be in touch regarding damages we intend to seek from you personally for breach of contract and reputational harm. Arthur. Lilith dropped the phone. It clattered onto the dirty linoleum floor of the police station. "This can't be real," she gasped, grabbing the junior associate's lapels. "Fix this. Tell them it was edited. Tell them I was provoked." "Get off me," the associate said, peeling her hands away with disgust. "I'm not here to represent you in the civil suits, Lilith. I was just sent to bail you out so the police didn't keep you overnight. You're on your own." He turned and walked away. Lilith stood in the lobby of the police station. Through the glass doors of the main entrance, she could see the flashing bulbs of paparazzi and news crews waiting like a pack of wolves. She had wanted attention. She had wanted everyone to know who she was. Now, everybody did. Her phone buzzed again on the floor, a notification from her bank. "Alert! Credit card ending in 4498 has been suspended by issuer due to risk assessment." The karma wasn't just hitting back, it was bludgeoning her. And the worst part? The flight she was supposed to be on, Flight 882, was currently halfway across the Atlantic, peaceful, quiet, and led by a captain who was currently being hailed as a global icon of integrity. Lilith fell to her knees, the cold reality settling in. She had lost her job, her reputation, her money, and her freedom, all because she couldn't stand the sight of a happy family in row 1. The taxi ride from the Queens police precinct back to Manhattan was a slow, suffocating crawl through rush-hour traffic. It was the longest 45 minutes of Lilith Calloway's life. She sat in the back of a yellow cab that smelled faintly of stale tobacco and pine air freshener, a stark contrast to the plush leather interiors of the private car services she had exclusively used for the last decade. She couldn't call an Uber. When she had tried to open the app outside the station, a red banner had flashed across the screen. Account suspended, due to violation of community guidelines. The digital world was already closing its doors to her, locking her out one algorithm at a time. Rain streaked against the dirty window, blurring the city lights into smears of grey and neon. Lilith gripped her phone, her knuckles white. She had turned it off to stop the relentless buzzing, but the silence was almost worse. It left her alone with her thoughts, which were currently spinning in a cycle of disbelief and victimhood. "They can't do this to me," she told herself, staring at the back of the driver's head. "I'm a vice president. I'm a property owner. I'm Lilith Calloway." But when the taxi finally pulled up to the Beresford, the iconic, ultra-exclusive co-op building on the Upper West Side that she called home, reality didn't just knock, it kicked the door down. Usually, the arrival at her building was a choreographed dance of deference. Henry, the head doorman who had known her for 10 years, would rush out with a large umbrella, shielding her from the elements, while a porter whisked her bags away. Today, Henry stood rigidly behind the thick glass doors of the lobby, his arms crossed over his chest. On the sidewalk, a chaotic swarm of photographers and news crews was camped out under the awning. They looked like a pack of wolves waiting for a wounded deer. As Lilith opened the cab door, the flashbulbs exploded in her face, blinding and disorienting her. "Lilith! Lilith! Over here!" "Miss Calloway, is it true you called the pilot a servant? Lilith, smile for the camera. How does it feel to be the most hated woman in New York?" The questions were shouted like accusations. Lilith gasped, shielding her face with her ruined Louis Vuitton bag, which was now scuffed and stained from the police station floor. She pushed through the mob, feeling microphones graze her shoulder, cameras shoving into her personal space. She stumbled toward the entrance, breathless and frantic, hammering her fist on the glass. "Henry!" she screamed, her voice muffled by the thick glass. "Open the door! It's me! Let me in!" Henry didn't move. He didn't even blink. He looked at the intercom phone on his desk, picked it up, and spoke a few brief words. He didn't look at Lilith. He looked through her, as if she were a ghost or a pile of trash left on the curb. The buzzer eventually sounded, but Henry didn't step forward to hold the door. Lilith had to heave the heavy brass door open herself, stumbling into the cool, marble-floored lobby. She collapsed against the wall, her chest heaving, safe from the flashbulbs, but trapped in a new kind of nightmare. "Why didn't you help me?" Lilith shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted, hand-painted ceiling. "I could have been hurt. I'll have your job for this, Henry. Do you hear me? You're finished." "You don't have the power to fire anyone anymore, Ms. Calloway." The voice was cold, sharp, and aristocratic. Lilith spun around. Standing by the elevators was Beatrice Vanderbilt, the president of the co-op board. Beatrice was a woman of old money, the kind of wealth that whispered rather than shouted. Beside her stood a man Lilith recognized as the building's legal counsel, holding a briefcase like a shield. "Beatrice," Lilith panted, trying to smooth her wrinkled blazer and compose her face into a mask of civility. "Thank God. It's been a nightmare. You have to tell the staff to keep that riffraff away from the entrance. It's a security risk, and I need a drink. Let's go up to my—" "You need to leave," Beatrice interrupted. Her tone was not angry. It was dismissive. It was the tone one used for a servant who had spilled wine on a carpet. Lilith froze. "Excuse me?" "We held an emergency board meeting via Zoom 20 minutes ago," Beatrice said, extending a hand. The lawyer placed a thick, cream-colored envelope into it, which Beatrice then thrust toward Lilith. "Your conduct today has triggered the morality and reputation clause in your proprietary lease. Specifically, Clause 14b, Section 3, bringing undue shame, notoriety, or criminal association to the building." Lilith stared at the envelope. She didn't take it. "You can't kick me out. I own that apartment. It's worth $4 million. I spent 2 years renovating the kitchen." "It is a co-op, Lilith. You own shares in the corporation, and the corporation has just voted unanimously to revoke them." The lawyer stepped in, his voice dry and factual. "The notoriety you have brought to this address in the last 6 hours is unacceptable. We have news vans blocking the resident's garage. We have hate mail flooding the concierge desk. You are a liability." "You have 48 hours to vacate the premises," Beatrice added, checking her diamond watch. "After that, we will change the locks and place your belongings in storage at your expense. If you return to the lobby after that time, you will be arrested for trespassing." "This is illegal," Lilith shrieked, the panic finally piercing her armor of entitlement. "I have rights. I am a victim here. That pilot attacked me." Beatrice's lip curled in disgust. "We saw the video, Lilith. The only thing attacked was decency. Henry, escort Ms. Calloway to the service elevator. She can pack her essentials, but she is not to use the main lobby again." "The service elevator?" Lilith gasped. "That's for garbage." "Exactly," Beatrice said, turning her back and walking toward the private gym. Henry stepped forward. His face was stone. "This way, Mum." Lilith was marched past the gilded mirrors and fresh orchids of the lobby, through a plain grey door, and into the freight elevator that smelled of cleaning chemicals. As the metal doors rattled shut, enclosing her in the industrial box, Lilith felt the first true crack in her reality. She wasn't just being cancelled online, she was being erased from the physical world she had built. When she finally entered her apartment, the silence was oppressive. It usually felt like a sanctuary, a pristine, white-carpeted fortress high above the city. Now, it felt like a mausoleum. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows to look out at Central Park, but she immediately recoiled. The news vans were still there, their satellite dishes pointed up at her living room like accusing fingers. She yanked the heavy velvet curtains shut, plunging the room into darkness. "I need a lawyer," she muttered, pacing the floor. "I need a shark. I need someone who will rip that airline apart." She grabbed her phone and dialed the number of Whitman and Price, the top litigation firm in the city. She had met the senior partner, Robert, at a charity gala 3 months ago. He had laughed at her jokes. He had kissed her ring. "Law offices of Whitman and Price," a receptionist answered smoothly. "Get me Robert Whitman, immediately. This is Lilith Calloway." "1 moment, please." Lilith tapped her foot, adrenaline coursing through her. "Robert will fix this," she thought. "He'll get an injunction. He'll sue the co-op board." A long pause. Then the receptionist returned. Her voice had changed. It was no longer warm. It was brittle. "Ms. Calloway, Mr. Whitman has asked me to inform you that our firm is conflicted out of representing you." "Conflicted? How? Who are you representing?" "We represent the Airline Pilots Association," the receptionist said, a hint of satisfaction leaking into her tone. "And frankly, ma'am, Mr. Whitman instructed me to tell you that he wouldn't represent you if you were the last client on Earth. Please do not call this office again." The line went dead. Lilith stood in the center of her darkening living room, the dial tone buzzing in her ear. She tried another firm, then another. "We aren't taking new clients. Our schedule is full. We don't handle toxic liability cases." For 6 hours, Lilith called every major firm in New York. The responses were identical. No one wanted to touch the airport Karen. She was radioactive. Her money was no good. Her influence had evaporated. Finally, at 2:30 a.m., desperate and drinking cheap cooking wine she had found in the back of her pantry because her delivery apps were blocked, she remembered something. A bench. A dirty bus stop bench she had seen from her taxi window years ago in Queens. Barry Finkelstein, "We fight for you when no one else will." It was a pathetic, last-ditch option, a strip mall lawyer. But she had no choice. She dialed the number, expecting a voicemail. "Finkelstein," a gruff voice answered on the first ring. It sounded like a man who smoked 2 packs a day and gargled with gravel. "I need representation," Lilith slurred, the wine hitting her empty stomach. "I have money. Well, I have assets. I'm Lilith Calloway." "The plain lady?" Barry chuckled, a wet, rasping sound. "I saw the video. Brutal. You really committed to the bit, huh?" "I was provoked," Lilith snapped. "Will you take the case or not?" "I'll take it," Barry said. "But my rate just went up. $500 an hour, paid up front. Cash or crypto only. No checks, no credit cards." "Why?" Lilith asked, confused. "My credit is excellent." "Not anymore, sweetheart," Barry said casually. "The airline just filed a federal civil suit against you about 20 minutes ago. I got the alert on the wire. They're seeking damages for the fuel dumping, the crew overtime, the landing fees, and reputational harm. They're asking for $2.4 million to start. And that doctor you yelled at, he just filed for emotional distress and defamation. Your assets are going to be frozen by the time the banks open in the morning." Lilith dropped the phone. It clattered onto the expensive hardwood floor she would soon no longer own. "Frozen," she whispered to the empty room. "You're being besieged, lady." Barry's voice tinny from the floor. "Be at my office in Queens at 9 a.m. and bring cash, whatever you have in the mattress." Lilith slowly sank to her knees. She looked around her beautiful apartment, the walls lined with art she had bought to impress people she didn't like, the furniture that cost more than most people made in a year. It was all slipping away like sand through her fingers. The silence of the apartment was no longer peaceful. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of her lungs. She was alone. Truly, utterly alone. But Lilith Calloway was not a woman who learned lessons. She was a woman who doubled down. The fear in her chest began to harden into a cold, jagged stone of spite. "They want a fight?" she hissed to the shadows, her eyes narrowing. "I'll give them a war." The wheels of justice turned slowly, but for Lilith Calloway, they felt like the grinding gears of a trash compactor closing in on her life. 6 months had passed since Flight 882. 6 months since she had been the vice president of communications at a global firm. 6 months since she had lived in the Beresford on the Upper West Side. Now she sat at the defendant's table in the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York, picking at a loose thread on the sleeve of a charcoal gray suit she had purchased at an outlet mall in New Jersey. The fabric was stiff, polyblend, and retained heat in a way that made her skin crawl. It was a tactile reminder of how far she had fallen. The courtroom was a cavernous space of dark wood and cold marble, smelling faintly of lemon polish and old paper. It was packed to capacity. The gallery was filled not with supporters, but with spectators, law students, bloggers, and the press. They were there for the spectacle. They were there to see the first-class Karen finally face the music. Lilith adjusted her glasses, trying to summon the imperious glare that used to make interns weep. But here, stripped of her designer armor and her corporate title, the glare had no power. She looked tired. Her hair, once a golden helmet of expensive blowouts, was pulled back in a severe, frizzy bun that highlighted the new lines of bitterness etched around her mouth. Next to her sat Barry Finkelstein, the only lawyer who would take her case without a 6-figure retainer she no longer possessed. Barry was a man who seemed to be sweating grease even in the air-conditioned room. He shuffled papers with disorganized, frantic energy, muttering to himself about procedural overreach. "Stop fidgeting," Lilith hissed at him, keeping her voice low. "You look guilty." I look like a man trying to save a sinking ship with a teaspoon, Barry shot back, not bothering to look at her. Just sit there and look remorseful. Can you do that? Try to look like a human being for once. Lilith bristled, turning her head away. She looked across the aisle to the plaintiff's table. The sight made her stomach turn with a mix of envy and rage. The legal team representing the airline looked like sharks in Italian wool, sleek, predatory, and calm. And sitting with them was Eleanor Bishop. Eleanor looked magnificent. She wore a cream-colored power suit that Lilith recognized instantly as a Dior custom piece. She sat with her back straight, her hands clasped on the table, radiating a quiet, terrifying confidence. She didn't look at Lilith. She looked through her, as if Lilith were a smudge on a window pane that was about to be wiped away. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Mary Ann O'Connor entered the room. She was a woman of small stature, but immense presence, known in legal circles for her sharp intellect and zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. She took her seat, her eyes scanning the room before landing heavily on Lilith. "Be seated," Judge O'Connor said. "We are here for closing arguments and the final verdict in the matter of Global Airways v. Callaway, consolidated with the civil suit Bishop v. Callaway." The trial had been a 3-day massacre. Lilith had hoped to take the stand, to explain that she was the victim of a woke mob, that she had suffered from anxiety, that the pilot had overreacted. But Barry had forbidden it. "If you open your mouth," he had told her, "the jury will double the damages within 5 minutes." Now she had to listen to the airline's lead counsel, a man named Mr. Sterling, no relation to the law firm that rejected her, deliver his closing statement. Sterling walked to the jury box, his movements precise. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Sterling began, his voice echoing in the silent room. "We have spent 3 days discussing numbers. We have discussed the $45,000 of fuel that had to be jettisoned over the Atlantic Ocean because the plane was too heavy to land safely. We have discussed the $12,000 in landing fees. We have discussed the $250,000 in vouchers my client had to issue to apologize to the other passengers." He paused, resting a hand on the railing. "But this case is not about money. It is about the social contract. When you buy a ticket on an airplane, you agree to a set of rules. You agree that for the duration of that flight, you are part of a community. You agree that the captain's word is law. Lilith Callaway believed she was above that law. She believed her status, her race, and her bank account gave her the right to abuse a family, insult a crew, and endanger 300 lives. Sterling turned and pointed a finger directly at Lilith. It felt like a physical blow. She called the cockpit a service entrance. She called a neurosurgeon a thug. She didn't just delay a flight, she attacked the dignity of everyone on board. We ask you to hold her accountable, not just for the cost of the fuel, but for the cost of the hate. Lilith shook her head frantically, whispering to Barry, "Object! He's being emotional. That's prejudicial." "Shut up," Barry whispered back. "He's closing. There are no objections in closing." Then it was Eleanor Bishop's turn. She didn't use a lawyer for this part. As a licensed attorney, she had been granted permission to speak for her family. Eleanor stood up. She didn't use notes. She walked to the center of the room and looked at the jury. A diverse group of New Yorkers who had watched the viral video with visible disgust. "My son, Marcus, is 14, Elena said softly. "He wants to be an engineer. He loves airplanes. He was so excited to sit in the front row. He wanted to see the cockpit." She took a breath, her voice trembling slightly, but remaining controlled. When Ms. Callaway began screaming, Marcus didn't look at her. He looked at his father. He looked at my husband, Kalen, with terror in his eyes. He asked me later, "Mum, did we do something wrong? Did we steal the seats?" A few jurors wiped their eyes. Lilith rolled hers, crossing her arms. The drama, she thought. They're milking it. "We didn't steal anything," Eleanor continued, her voice hardening into steel. "We earned our place. But Miss Calloway tried to steal our peace. She tried to steal my children's sense of safety. She looked at a black family and saw a threat. She looked at a black pilot and saw a servant. That is not a misunderstanding. That is malice. And malice must have a price." Elena sat down. The silence in the room was deafening. Barry Finkelstein's closing argument was a mumbled, incoherent mess about stressors and corporate overreach, which the jury tuned out after 30 seconds. The jury was sent out to deliberate. Lilith expected to wait hours, maybe days. She went to the court cafeteria, buying a stale bagel with the cash Barry had lent her. She sat alone, staring at the wall, convincing herself that there was still hope. "They can't bankrupt me," she thought. "I'm Lilith Calloway." 45 minutes later, the bailiff appeared. "The jury has reached a verdict." Lilith's heart hammered against her ribs as she walked back into the courtroom. It was too fast. A fast verdict was never good for the defendant. The jury filed in. They refused to look at her. "Mr. Foreman," Judge O'Connor said, "have you reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor," the foreman, a middle-aged schoolteacher, replied. "In the matter of Global Airways versus Calloway, how do you find?" "We find the defendant, Lilith Calloway, liable on all counts of negligence, breach of contract and tortious interference," the foreman read. Lilith gripped the table, her knuckles white. "And what damages do you award?" "We award the plaintiff economic damages in the amount of $2.4 million, the foreman stated, and punitive damages in the amount of $800,000. Lilith gasped. The sound was like a balloon popping in the silence. Over $3 million. It was everything she had left, and everything she would ever earn for the next 20 years. "And in the matter of Bishop vs. Calloway?" the judge asked. "We find the defendant liable for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We award the Bishop family $500,000. Lilith stood up, her chair scraping screechingly against the floor. The reality of the numbers crashed into her delusion, shattering it instantly. "This is extortion!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "I don't have that kind of money. You're ruining my life over a few words. I just wanted to switch seats." "Sit down, Miss Calloway," Judge O'Connor barked, banging her gavel with a force that made the wood groan. "No!" Lilith yelled, her face blotchy and red. "This is a setup. You're all against me because I'm white. It's reverse racism. That pilot should have been fired for walking out on me." Barry Finkelstein put his head in his hands. The jury looked at her with pure revulsion. Elena Bishop simply watched, her expression unreadable. "Marshal, secure the defendant," Judge O'Connor ordered. A federal marshal stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on Lilith's shoulder, forcing her back into her chair. Lilith slumped, panting, tears of rage streaming down her face. Judge O'Connor adjusted her glasses, peering down at Lilith from the high bench. The judge's face was a mask of icy disapproval. "Miss Calloway," the judge said, her voice quiet but amplified by the microphone, reaching every corner of the room. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have seen murderers, fraudsters, and thieves. Many of them showed some flicker of remorse. You have shown none." The judge picked up a thick document from her desk. "You believe you are the victim here. You believe that your convenience outweighs the dignity of others. You treated a commercial aircraft as your private kingdom and its passengers as your subjects. You were wrong." Judge O'Connor signed the paper with a sharp scratch of her pen. "The financial judgments against you are severe. They will likely result in your bankruptcy. But money seems to be the only thing you respect, so perhaps that is fitting. However, the Federal Aviation Administration has petitioned this court for a non-monetary judgment, citing you as a permanent threat to aviation safety. Lilith froze. The tears stopped. What? I am granting the FAA's motion, Judge O'Connor declared. Effective immediately, you are placed on the federal no-fly list. The gallery gasped. This was the nuclear option. This is not a temporary suspension, the judge continued, her eyes locking onto Lilith's. This applies to all commercial carriers operating within, departing from, or arriving in the United States. You are banned from American Airlines, United, Delta, Global, all of them. You are grounded, Miss Calloway, permanently. You can't do that, Lilith whispered, her voice barely audible. My sister lives in Paris. I go to St. Bart's for Christmas. How am I supposed to travel? I suggest you learn to love the scenic route, Judge O'Connor said dryly. There are trains, there are buses, there are boats, but the sky is a privilege, and you have lost it. The judge slammed the gavel down one final time. Court is adjourned. The sound echoed like a gunshot, signaling the end of Lilith's life as she knew it. As the courtroom began to empty, reporters shouting questions, Lilith sat paralyzed. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking uncontrollably. She looked up one last time to see Elena Bishop embracing her husband, Kalen. They looked happy. They looked free. They were likely flying back to Maryland tonight in first class. Lilith Calloway, the woman who thought the world belonged to her, realized with a crushing weight that her world had just shrunk to the size of a Greyhound bus seat. She had wanted to create distance between herself and those she felt were beneath her. Now, she would never be able to rise above them again. The karma hadn't just hit back, it had clipped her wings forever. Lilith Calloway's downfall serves as a brutal reminder that in the modern world, status is fragile and character is permanent. She believed her wealth and skin color were passports that allowed her to mistreat others with impunity. But she forgot that dignity cannot be bought, and true authority, like that of Captain Washington, is earned through integrity, not entitlement. The karma that hit Lilith wasn't just about losing money. It was about the total erasure of the identity she worshipped. She tried to ground a family she deemed unworthy, and in doing so, she grounded herself for life. It is a classic tale of hubris. The higher you hold your nose, the harder you fall. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit the like button to help us grow. Share this video with someone who needs to see hard karma in action. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story.